Hello, this is Ed Tyson from MMA Collector. Every week I will bring in a new piece of memorabilia for my personal collection and even bring in a few collector friends with some of theirs. Our goal is to raise awareness of MMA memorabilia collecting and discuss the historical people and fights that made this sport what it is today. Join me now while we take a stroll down memorabilia lane. Welcome to this week's episode of MMA Collector. A couple of weeks back I made a promise that I would bring out a rare piece of fight used memorabilia. I had purchased a collection of Mark Hall items, and one of my pieces is a pretty rare piece. These are the pants that Mark wore in UFC 7. Now, UFC 7 dates back quite a ways back.
Oh yeah, that's that MooYeaDo.
Yeah,
You know, UFC 7 is ancient history. You know, we're talking about 1995, Mark the whole Cobra autograph on them and stuff. That's cool stuff. 1995, with this is ancient history now, 28 years old. And back in the day, they used to be able to wear long pants in the UFC.
yeah. I didn't see it.
I was going to ask you, is that just a piece of fight war memorabilia, UFC 7?
No. I actually have some older yet fight used memorabilia.
Cool. But this is a rare piece. UFC 7, an amazing UFC. Mark Hall's first appearance. Mark Hall, actually one of those guys, is probably going to get forgotten in the mix, as time goes by here. But man, for the early days, this guy, one of the things that escapes people now you get the professional athlete, who's like, yeah, I'm here to do my job and stuff like that. And most of the guys in the early days were missing that. They were there for other reasons, to test themselves, testosterone, whatever it was. And it all made it a little bit more crazy. You know what I mean? So, and Mark Hall was a little guy in that atmosphere. And at the end of the day, he went 4-3 in the UFC. 4-3 is not a record to sneeze at.
In UFC 7, his first fight, he took out Harold Howard. But in the semifinals, he had to meet the polar bear, Paul Varlins. And when they were standing next to each other, Mark Hall looked like a child next to him. Paul kind of just manhandled him, took him down, and just kind of, I think he neck cranked him or something to that effect. And I think he,
I think it was a key lock, but I think that was respectful of Paul. Even back in the early days, there was a sense of sportsmanship. He was probably twice Mark's size, and he took him down and submitted him in a minute instead of smashing him. He had been in a tussle in his first fight with Cal Worsham. So, that was the end of his UFC run with UFC 7, but he went 1-1 there. And he also had a decorated career. Long pants, he's best remembered too, I think, for extracurricular outside of the ring activities, fighting Ken Shamrock and stuff like that. How did you come about these pants? You said there was a third party. Tell the story behind getting Mark Hall's collection.
Well, I purchased a collection from a guy out east, which I've had a couple of those items in previous episodes of MMA Collector. So this was actually one of the really prized pieces that I picked up from him. And the guy that I bought him from got him directly from Mark. He bought a few other items, and I got the boxes from Mark Hall, sending them directly to this individual whom I bought them from. So, they're 100% legit. It was a small collection of stuff, but it was all owned by Mark Hall. There's other walk-in shirt. There's, a couple other things that were pretty significant dating that far back, into the 90s.
Yeah, for sure. For the historians in there, I got to peek a little bit at Ed's collection. And, there's also a couple of master tapes to something called the Cobra Challenge, which are small, no-holds-barred events. I imagine they had very little to no rules, from back in the 90s that Mark was actually the promoter of. And you're unlikely to be able to see those in many places. But there are master tapes somewhere in there that, at some point we could unearth. And then there are also some cute items. I thought, it was cool. Mark, in back in the day, there was a rolled up poster, and there was probably 3 or 4 left of a picture of Mark raising his hands after winning in the octagon that he had blown up and he was signing and giving away to people, So
Yeah.
it's just a window into, back in the 90s, the way things were done, before social media and stuff. And I think, Mark had the promoter hat on, he had the fighter hat on. I just don't think there was enough money to keep everybody around, but he made a go at it in the mid 90s. He was active, very active, and all that is a good sign that the collection is safe with you.
He did. And yes, and one other little bit of history I'd like to bring up is UFC 7 marked the very first event in New York State. It was actually held in Buffalo, New York. And after that event, it was the last ever event in New York for 21 years. It wasn't until UFC 205, 21 years later, that there would ever be another event in New York.
Yeah, and I'm sure that we'll cover that, those historic moments again at some point here at MMA Collector. But what we've just done, one last look at the Mark Hall short pants here. I keep calling them shorts, and they're not shorts. That's one of the things that makes them absolutely unique too, is that this was back in the day when, a traditional martial arts practitioner could walk into the octagon wearing that. And you just don't see that anymore. Thanks, Ed. Mark Hall is probably not a Hall of Famer, but his career certainly should not be forgotten. He had a comeback fight in 2001 on his own show, The Cobra Challenge, but most of his real fighting was done by 1997, which puts him firmly in the pioneer category. He has a deceiving 4-3 record in the UFC, and he went 1-1 in fights where the man standing on the opposite side of the cage was at least twice his weight. In September of 97, he fought his last fights in the legendary IVC2 tournament in Brazil, and there too he went 1-1. He won his opening round match in 9 minutes before succumbing to Artur Mariano in 8 minutes in the semifinals of IVC2. Mariano would go on to defeat Vanderlei Silva in a legendary final, but one of the reasons IVC2 is given legendary status is the performance of Mark Hall. Mark the Cobra Hall always gave his all, and he definitely went out fighting to end the pioneer portion of his career. He carried on promoting shows under the Cobra Challenge name until 2003 before leaving the sport of MMA for good. Mark Hall, definitely a name from the early days you should remember. Hey, join us next week on MMA Collector as Ed brings us a collector's item commemorating the UFC's 10th anniversary. Take a moment to like and share and subscribe to the MMA Collector on YouTube and join our collector community.